Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for another WIA webinar series. We are incredibly excited to be kicking this series off with the support of Dataiku. We have Kirsten Hoogenakker with us today, who's going to be talking a little bit more about a no-code chatbot and pipeline with Dataiku. If this is your first time joining us for one of our webinars, we've got a couple of logistics things we'll get through, and then we'll get right into the good stuff. So like I mentioned, I've got a couple of things I'm going to get through on the front end, including an introduction to the series itself, a little bit of information around women in analytics, and then I'll hang it over to Kirsten to dive into Dataiku in her presentation. And then throughout that, if you have any questions, please feel free to throw those in the Q&A, and we will get to those at the end of the session. This series is focused around the future of AI, harnessing generative technologies for success. So this is a bi-weekly webinar series. We'll be right here on Zoom every other Wednesday, so stay tuned for the information around the following one, which will happen in 2 weeks. Like I mentioned, this will be a 3-episode series. We'll kind of dive into the world of GenAI. We'll talk a little bit more about just the overview of its use cases, tools, best practices, and so much more. And then within this series, each individual episode will focus on something a little different. So stay tuned on those next 2 episodes as well. And then if this is your first time joining us, I would love to take a moment just to kind of talk about women in analytics. So we were an organization founded in 2016, really with a mission to increase visibility to women, non-binary, gender fluid individuals making an impact in data. We do this a couple of different ways, this webinar being an example of that. We just closed out our annual Data Connect conference earlier this month. We've got a couple of other satellite events going on, as well as year-round programming. So if you're interested in staying in the loop on some of the things that we are hosting throughout the year, including our events calendar, we've got a career advocacy center. We just launched a book club at the beginning of the month as well. You can scan this QR code here on the screen to tune into the platform and stay in the loop on all the things we have going on. And then throughout the webinar, if you're running into any questions or things that you would like to ask Kirsten towards the end of the presentation, definitely throw those in the Q&A. We want to take advantage of having these folks available to answer all of the questions that we have coming up in our minds throughout. Additionally, if you're running into any audio issues or aren't able to see presentations or anything like that, you can shoot us an email at info@womeninanalytics.com. I'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation and can try to help mitigate any issues that you might run into. And then again, if you're interested in staying in the loop on future sessions, you can follow us on socials. We've got a newsletter and then the platform mentioned on the previous page as well. So I do want to take a second to just thank Dataiku for supporting the series. And I'll turn it over to Kirsten, to start diving into the presentation. And I know she's got some slides around Dataiku built into that as well. So I'm sure she'll dive into it. So thanks so much, Kirsten, for joining us. And I'll throw it over to you.
Awesome. Well, I am super stoked to be here today. Go ahead and share my screen, move a couple of things around. All right. So again, like I said, stoked to be here. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to share this time with all of you. I know that there's some huge kudos that need to go out to the entire team who made today's session possible. So hopefully it'll be a little bit of fun and definitely a lighthearted use case that we're going to go through. And hopefully it's going to pack a punch to demonstrate the power of generative AI and one option for easy development of these chatbots. So one thing that I'm really passionate about is being able to create technical content without necessarily having to have a really technical background. And this is a big part of my role at Dataiku. So I work as a senior sales engineer and Dataiku in its essence is just an AI and analytics software company. And I know that my role as a senior a sales engineer is something that was new to me before I took on this role. And I think it's probably one of the best blends between being heavily technical, I've got that technical prowess, and at the same time, I get to interact with all of my people soft skills at the same time. So I get the opportunity to talk to individual contributors all the way up to the C-suite across all lines of business. I get to run demos and workshops and build out proof of concepts all on the Dataiku software. So it's really a dream job. I love working at Dataiku. You're going to get to see the product live here in a few minutes. A little bit just about me in general. So I kind of took a weird winding path to get here. So I have a degree in biochemistry and molecular biology. And then I was actually a high school teacher for 7 years. So there's kind of this strange back and forth of like, yes, there's that technical sciencey side. Definitely really look into having people upskill. So the skill sets that I had in helping people learn definitely drive a lot of what I like to do in my day job. So when I'm not busy working with prospects and customers, you can definitely find me riding my bicycle for long miles out with friends, or potentially cozied up with a book outside, just trying to be my own introverted self. So enough about me. Let's dive into the content today. So I'll start with a quick overview of Dataiku as a platform, which will help you get the lay of the land, and then we'll pop into the actual project to build out a chatbot with kind of a fun premise that is focused on karaoke. And then we'll look at some of those other GenAI capabilities that you can build out in Dataiku without needing to know any code. So maybe this is just the inspiration that you need to get out there and sing some karaoke this week. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So what the heck is Dataiku? What is this platform that we keep talking about? It's an end-to-end data science platform that really allows subject matter experts, analysts, data scientists, people who work in ML ops to really leverage the power of analytics and AI to transform business, right? So that's just like a jargony piece of information on like what we do. At its essence, Dataiku is going to act as an orchestration layer. So we're going to be able to point to the existing infrastructure and architecture within an organization. That infrastructure tends to change a lot, right? So maybe it's with one of the major cloud vendors, maybe it's working with data warehouses like Snowflake or Databricks, and it kind of interchanges throughout time. So Dataiku allows for those transitions to happen while keeping the UI or the interface that you're working on the same. One other thing that I really appreciate about the platform is that it really does encompass this like full code all the way to low code, no code, and allows everybody to kind of interact on the same platform. So regardless if you want to work in notebooks, in Python or R or SQL, or if you just want to use a point and click interface, Dataiku is going to allow you to do that, which is really great. Basically, Dataiku starts at that data connection level and allows you to develop, run through different exploratory data analysis, do some simple visualizations, run through those data transformations that you need to prepare a data set for AI ML, and then actually develop that machine learning project. So that can be done, again, as I mentioned, through code notebooks or through a visual platform. And today we're really going to focus on that visual side of things. As the title of the presentation shows, today's focus is really going to be on that like data building kind of piece, but we're really going to focus on leveraging the GenAI capabilities. And so down here on the bottom right corner of the slides, you'll see what we call kind of our LLM mesh. And this is just a fancy term that allows a full pipeline of generative AI capabilities with very few limits on the models that you want to test out. So we can bring in local models, we can connect to OpenAI, whatever sort of LLM connections that your organization might run, and you'll see it in the demo that it's just a drop down. So it's really agnostic in terms of what you're able to connect to. The LLM mesh also includes things like cost guard. So we'll take a look at how you might be able to compare outputs from LLMs and be able to tell whether or not it's going to be really costly to run those on massive amounts of data. And again, I mentioned that we're going to use the no code options today. Right. So let me go ahead and just set the stage. So at Dataiku, one thing that we really love to do is have this tradition of after a conference going to karaoke. So once the conference is over, we depart from the conference, and usually, we might split up and go to some customer dinners, but at the end of the night, we always seem to end up at the same karaoke bar. And so this was kind of the impetus for this project that shows a lot of the capabilities with kind of like a fun little session that we call the GenAI Jam. And so I wanted to streamline some of the processes that we go through when we think about, where are we going to go to karaoke? What song do I sing for karaoke? Who do I want to be able to sing with? And one thing that kind of blends into the Gen AI space is being able to use something like a RAG pipeline. So I can actually take bodies of documentation to reference as a part of our LLM process that we're going to walk through today. So one way that we might frame this in like a serious way is the documents that are being piped into this pipeline are going to be things like venues that maybe finance department at Dataiku is going to foot the bill for. It's going to be things like personal information about folks who might be coming to karaoke. So who do I want to sing with? Will our voices match up together? And then the last piece is just maybe work appropriate songs for our karaoke sessions. So in this setting, I think I can accomplish this sort of chatbot using a RAG pipeline, especially, as I work through this demo, you'll kind of see that come through. So I might have some additional questions that are beyond what's available in that documentation, like that body of documentation. So we're also going to look at some prompt engineering, or what we call our prompt studios. So we'll also cover how you might do some additional prompting as a part of using the Dataiku platform. Please feel free to pop in questions to the Q&A as they come up. I do have that window open, so I can kind of take a look at that as we go through. Just a little reminder. All right. So this is the homepage for Dataiku. You can see it's accessed just through a general URL. And I can see a number of different projects that I have access to. It's a super collaborative space. So, Kelsey and I could come into the same project and be able to work on this together. And as I mentioned today, we're going to look at this GenAI Jam project. It's a mouthful. And this is just our simple flow. So I can go to the homepage of the project. I can see that, I've really been the only one working on it. I can see a quick timeline. If I wanted to write a description for this project, that's something I'd be able to do just from, a documentation standpoint. Dataiku as a whole does have a number of different data connectors. So anything from SQL databases to different cloud storage. We have over 70 different connectors that we're able to point to. Today's session is going to be mostly just run on Snowflake from a push-down compute standpoint. So I have a couple of things already set up. The first is this editable data set called duets. So we'll jump in there. I'll give you a little bit of a lay of the land. We've got a number of Dataiku employees here. I know where they're based out of. This will become important later on when we realize that, maybe we're trying to look for karaoke bars in New York. And so I'm not going to be able to sing with someone in California if they're, not in New York. And then we've got their singing voice. So we can try and create some really stellar harmonies. And maybe these people are better singers than I am. I don't think I'm capable of actually harmonizing. All right, so we've got our people. So this would be, maybe a little more sensitive information. And what I want to do is actually go through and start to run through data preparation with this. So this is our data prep, our prepare recipe. And we've done a couple of things. So the first thing is we've just concatenated all of these columns into a natural language text column. And this is going to be important for us to be able to create the vector store and the knowledge bank that chatbot is going to be referencing later on. And then we're just going to rename that column as well. So within any of these prepare recipes, you'll see that we have 100 different processors. So there's a lot of capabilities within these data sets to clean your data, to work with strings, to run, Excel-like formulas. There are if then else statements that are put into a visual format that I found really helpful to kind of work through a little bit more complex logic as a part of these. So these are just some ways that you might start manipulating or transforming your data. There are easy ways to work with strings in Dataiku. So as we think about generative AI really focusing on the natural language, Dataiku can suggest different ways that I might want to clean this text. So that's a part of, creating a clean data set that we're going to be able to use downstream. All right, go back to our data set here. You'll see that there are a number of different visual recipes that we can use. So again, today focusing on some of those non-coding options. So when we think about transforming data, getting it ready for pipelining, we can go ahead and sample, we can run different visual join recipes, we can split, create top N and window functions. There's a lot of different capabilities that Dataiku can run through visually. And then you'll see that there are code recipes. We're not going to get into those today, but it is just like embedded notebooks. And then we've got a streamlined way to go ahead and run through different code environments to get your notebooks into production. All right. So we've got our output data set. You can take a look at this. And as I had mentioned, we're just concatenating that last column into this data set. And that's going to become a part of our actual reg pipeline coming up here soon. This is just a sync recipe, and basically all that does is pushes this data set into a managed folder. And if we go into this folder, we'll see that there are actually a number of different documents available that I've already kind of put in here. I had mentioned earlier that there was going to be some, Dataiku approved bars that we'd be able to go to, and some songs that are also, quote unquote work appropriate. So these are just PDFs. One cool thing about LLMs is that, it does actually need text data. So while we can go ahead and reference things like images and PDFs, we actually have to do a little bit of processing on them before we can query those in our chatbot. Normally, this takes a decent amount of code to be able to extract text from something like a PDF. Dataiku makes this pretty easy with just a plugin recipe. So I can go ahead and just within a couple of clicks, go ahead and extract this text. We're going to create an output data set. And then we're going to store that into Snowflake. So you'll see there are a number of different data connections that are available to me on this instance. So I get to go ahead and choose that. So we'll create this data set, create. And we're just going to run this as is. Cool. All right, so we'll head back into our flow, and now we can see that we've added this additional recipe here. That job has been completed. I can go into this, and now I see a couple of things. So in this data set, we've actually got all of the different file names that are available to us, and then this natural language. Sometimes this shows up on the screen, sometimes it doesn't. So hopefully here you can see this is all the text that's been extracted from that PDF. And then we're going to be able to chunk that out as a part of our embedding model. So the next step oftentimes in creating these pipelines is being able to chunk that out so that we can have clear source data and understand where our chatbot is getting its information from. So from here, we're going to take our text extractions and we're going to go ahead and actually create an embedded model, an embedding model here that's going to go ahead and chunk those out into an actual knowledge base, which is going to be stored in our vector store. So what I want to do is create this knowledge column on that text. So we've got all of our natural language. I'm going to add some metadata so that we can actually filter out things. So like if I'm in New York, I don't really care about what's happening in San Francisco and vice versa. So I should be able to filter this out based on the file. I'm going to leave all of our other settings here, but just know that there are a lot of ways to customize each of these recipes within Dataiku. Right. So while we're building out our knowledge bank, I want to show you how easy it is to go ahead and generate a visual recipe or a visual web app in Dataiku. So see, we have notebooks, we've got different web apps. There's lots of ways for us to run really complicated jobs in Dataiku, but we can also try and make that pretty simple. So I can go ahead and create a new web app. You'll see I could do that in full code, but today we're focusing on the visual side of things. And we have what we call our answers plugin. And this basically is a wrapper around everything that you would need to create a visual interface for a reg pipeline. So I'm just going to go ahead and create that web app. And what you'll see is we've got all of this list, these lists of settings that we can kind of go through as a part of this web app. We can go ahead and log our data set. So I can get an idea if someone else was also querying this web app, what sorts of questions they were asking. So we'll go ahead and just create a new data set here. And again, we're going to go ahead and store that in Snowflake. Go ahead and create that data set. Most of this stuff I'm going to leave as is, but you'll see that you can allow for user feedback. So if there are hallucinations, you can actually provide feedback on that for some sort of loop, right? We can kind of tune things from there. I had mentioned earlier this idea of the LLM mesh. And so you'll see here, I can actually drop down and take a look and decide which LLM I want to use. Some LLMs are going to answer things better than others, depending on your use case. Sometimes they're going to be really specialized. Other times they might be like really expensive and also really accurate, but maybe you don't need that high accuracy because it's not a very risky use case. Something like choosing karaoke songs, I'm probably not going to want to invest a ton of money into to have accurate results. It's just a fun use case. So in this case, we're just going to choose GPT 3.5, and we're actually going to select that knowledge bank that we just created, right? So that's going to include chunks of text for us to go ahead and make sure that we're using the information that is supplied by Dataiku in this case. Okay, so now we get to add some context, right? So we need to tell that LLM what its job is, what persona it's going to kind of play. And so in this case, you're an empathetic karaoke expert who loves to help people pick the right songs to sing based on their personalities and preferences. Please respond concisely. If any of you have used ChatGPT, you know sometimes those answers can be really long. And so let's see, I think I actually wanted to make sure. Yep. Looking good so far. So again, we could add another description. In this case, we can decide, right? We can actually let the web app decide if the knowledge bank should be used. So depending on the question you ask, it might use our knowledge bank, it might not. I'm actually going to disable this because I want the LLM to always use the knowledge bank. I'm just going to zoom in just so that you can maybe read this a little easier. Okay, so select data or metadata. So as I mentioned earlier, we might want to filter out based on the file that's in our knowledge bank. I only want to give one source left, and then same thing here, a little. And then I have some like pre-canned questions that we're going to go ahead and answer. So I know that like for me, I like it when people sing along with me in karaoke. So the more people who are yelling in the crowd, the more fun I'm usually having. And so I've just got some pre-canned questions that we'll go ahead and answer. All right. So all of this looks good. I'm going to actually change where we're running this. We're just going to run this on the back end for today. So this is just creating the web app, right? So again, just through a couple of drop downs, we've got some pretty good documentation on how to use this particular plugin. And then I don't have to think about the HTML, the CSS, running this, what sort of server it's running on. Dataiku takes care of all of that. So here's our chatbot. As you can see, it's really easy to use. I can decide whether or not I want to use that knowledge bank, and I can also filter this out. Oh, I did not do the metadata correctly, but normally you'd have the option there to go ahead and filter out certain files that were as a part of your login. All right, so we can go ahead and just take this particular question and send that through the chatbot so we can see it's querying. And then we can take a look at the sources, and I can search for like Blink 182, and I can see that it's got, the group sing along tag on it. So this allows me to know that the chatbot is actually pulling information from our knowledge bank, and that it's not coming from somewhere else. All right. So we'll see this one, a duet. So maybe I want to sing a duet. Blink 182 is not really a duet. Islands in the Stream and Dolly Parton, girl after my own heart. I love her so much. So maybe I'm going to be the Dolly Parton in this duet. And I need somebody who is a tenor to go ahead and fill in for Kenny Rogers. Okay, so this is based on the knowledge bank. You can see that it's not necessarily giving an answer that would be acceptable. So I can actually give this a bad response and say that this didn't pull from the knowledge bank. And I'd be able to go ahead and see this feedback as a part of that logging documentation. So when I think about like the holistic view of being able to create a generative AI pipeline, it's not just about the content, it's also about creating a feedback loop so that we've got some sense of responsible AI, that it's not going rogue, that we've got a place that we can actually set like some automation scenarios for when these types of bad responses come through. We've got a way to kind of check that out and make sure that it's a reliable model and it's actually performing in the way that we would expect it to and not providing harmful results. All right. So last question for this particular chatbot is like maybe figuring out where I'm going to go, where Dataiku is going to flip the tab for this. So I don't know where RPM Underground is. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm in the middle of the country. I think Ashley Scott is on the line, totally calling her out as a New Yorker. Potentially she would want to know where this is, and I would go sing karaoke with her. Awesome. So really simple, like literally in the case of like just like 5 minutes, I'd be able to go ahead and build out a full RAG pipeline and a chatbot in Dataiku without needing to know a single line of code. And I think this is really powerful, both as somebody who is technical, but also understands that like efficiency in my time matters a lot too. So if I'm not having to line by line code everything, troubleshoot, trying to use code assistance, I could see that this would actually be a really beneficial way for me to start getting these good use cases into production. Hopefully you can see how these would play into some real life use cases. So whether that's, querying different HR policies is a common use case that I've seen in industry. Maybe it's looking at, different, I have like a bunch of manufacturing customers who are using it to help people who are out in the field query like documentation, right? When they're out there fixing different parts, they're able to go ahead and make sure that they're, quickly able to pull up the right instruction manuals to go ahead and fix different parts that they're trying to fix. So lots of use cases within just this chatbot realm. One other piece that I wanted to show you as a part of this generative AI, like really getting a head start, is what I would call our prompt studios. So this is just another way that our LLM mesh allows you to actually capture different parts of the projects that you might be working on. So we'll go into this karaoke question. And what you can see here is there's a couple of different queries that we've actually run on our singer attributes data set. Just like everywhere else in Dataiku, we've got connections to LLMs, so I can actually select which LLMs I want to use. You'll see that there are actually RAG models available for me to leverage within the prompt studios. So if I wanted to only use those knowledge banks that we created as a part of our documentation, I'd be able to use those in these prompt studios. Similarly, like maybe I'm emceeing this karaoke night and I just need a creative introduction to welcome these people on stage. So if the singer attributes data set had some additional information, maybe it's got people's pet names on there. Maybe it talks a little bit about what they're interested in. Their favorite karaoke song is maybe not what they're singing tonight. They're doing something different. So there's a lot of different ways that we'd be able to word this prompt to go ahead and kind of come in. One thing that I appreciate about these prompt studios is that I get to choose how many test cases are going into the prompt. So instead of running it on a million records at once and incurring some pretty big costs for the organization, I can actually run it on a test set of the data to kind of understand whether or not those results are going to be useful and helpful to me. So I can see I've got Chris Helmus here. I've got some results, right? We can see how they might be different from person to person. And this is the LLM actually generating the responses for this query, okay? I can see the cost to run 1,000 records. So if these results are acceptable for this cost, I can actually make that judgment within Dataiku itself. And then I can also compare, right? So here I'm using 3.5. I might want to know what that looks like on GPT-4. I can see that it's 10 times as expensive for me to run it on GPT-4, but I get these cool emojis. So like maybe that's something that's worth the cost, right? This is obviously a lot longer. This is certainly some creative wording coming from GPT-4. So the ability to compare and contrast different prompts and understand how you're iterating through those before you would do something like save this as a recipe. So this is actually going to put it into that workflow, that pipeline that we saw earlier. And then I'd be able to continue iterating on this as we went through. So just a cool little feature as we kind of think about how you might run different LLMs, GenAI features in a data set or on a data set. As I had mentioned before, there are a number of different LLM recipes available in Dataiku. There's also a fine-tuning recipe that is going to be available in 13.1. But what's kind of cool about the prompt studios is that there are some kind of like pre-canned prompts that you can look at. So maybe there are a couple of things that you might want to do. So there's this managed mode. We can do advanced, which is going to give you complete control over that final prompt. Or you might just have a prompt without inputs. So might be a blank template. Maybe you're trying to look at product reviews, looking at contract text. This is a really common use case right now, is being able to actually analyze that contract text. And so Dataiku has some ways to streamline those workflows, so you're not having to start from scratch every time. So when I think about the reusability or some of the additional features that are available, it's just, again, going to help you from a no-code standpoint, be able to implement some pretty cool use cases within the product itself. So there are some things with like classification and extracting the technical specifications. This was one that I had mentioned earlier, where maybe you've got field technicians who are out there trying to fix different components from a manufacturing company. They're able to kind of pull those out. I did not want to create that. That's okay. I'll delete that later. One other thing I would just kind of point out as a part of Dataiku when it comes to those connections and having full control over where and how you are managing. Let's see, actually go to a different instance, different connections for LLMs, and having the option to kind of compare and contrast, right? So again, different models are going to respond in different ways. So we'll go ahead and just kind of take a look at some of these connections. And if we take a look at something like OpenAI, we do have, you know, this LLM mesh. You can see that there's a number of different logos here. So you might be familiar with some of these. We've got the ability to pull in local models as well, and also custom LLMs. Hi, Louise. Good morning. So we've got a question that says, once we have made the chatbot, are we able to view the actual code lines just to learn in kind of a reverse engineering way? So there are, in Dataiku, you are usually only one step away from being able to see the code itself. Some of it is proprietary. So there are some pieces where it's not as easy to transition to and from that code itself. And I don't know that I've actually tried to find the code for the prompt studio. Let me see if we have access to that. Off the top of my head, I don't think you can. It might be in the logs. I know that our like visual ML, you can actually export as a part of that, but I don't know if we can do that with the prompt engineering itself. Let's see. I want to say that we can, but I'm not going to do it live. So I would love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn if that's an option. And I can get back to you on that. I want to say we can do that, and I'm not sure exactly where. As a part of creating these connections, what's cool is that you can actually select certain groups of people to have access to certain LLMs. So as we think about productionalizing some of these models, bringing in new models, maybe you only want to let certain people use them. There are some additional features when it comes to caching. So anything that's being sent to that LLM, we can actually audit. We can take a look at that complete query and response here as a part of the audit logs. And then we also have different ways to take a look at toxicity detection, PII detection, and then forbidden terms. So, and the forbidden terms and toxicity are going to come both from the queries and responses. The PII is going to be just from the query. So this is going to disallow any sort of personal information to be sent to an open API for use on the LLMs. Just a couple of other kind of cool things when I think about, I don't know, I'm a kind of like a responsible AI governance nerd. So these are the things that I think are important to make sure that we don't have anything going completely rogue. You'll see that there are a number of different text completion models for me to just check on and off, which is really kind of an easy way to get this set up on the back end. And then any of these connections that you would set up, you would see in those drop downs for the LLM. So I think I want to be like super respectful of time. I think Kelsey, you said I had until 35 minutes after the hour. We are now at 11:34.
Yeah.
So I'm
That's
happy.
great. This was a great example. Yeah. We do have a little bit of time for additional questions. So if you are, harboring something that you were hoping to ask Kirsten today, please throw it in the Q&A. We definitely, like I mentioned at the beginning, want to take advantage of having access to these folks while they're presenting. While folks are thinking about and typing up questions, yeah, I see you have some resources to share. Also, if you would like to share with folks the best way to connect with you after the webinar as well, that would be lovely.
Yeah, I would say definitely LinkedIn. You've got my name in the Zoom chat. I know it's long and confusing, but I should be the only Kirsten Hoogenakker out there. If you just want to send me a note as a part of that connection that you attended the session, that also helps me kind of deepen some of those connections and make sure that, should you reach out to me in the future or vice versa, I have an idea of where we connected. Yeah, so the response feedback is going to come as a part of that log. As I mentioned, I can show you what that looks like here. So I actually have a couple of different flow zones. This is what the output might look like. So let's see, I can't remember which ones. One that has a little more data in it. So here we've got, the logging data, conversation name, knowledge bank ID that we're using, which LLM, which user is asking questions, the answer, the sources, and then you'd actually get that feedback, value, choice, and message here as a part of that. We'd be able to set up what we call an automation scenario that would say, if there was a feedback value, then tell Juan that, this knowledge bank would need to be looked at, or we'd be able to automate some of that. So it's really flexible in terms of how much human in the loop your use case requires. But you'd be able to pull it from this audit log, and you could automate that process to continue going as a part of that LLM ops process. Yeah, so I'm gonna go to Todd before I go to the anonymous, just because I think Todd's question will be a little easier. So would it be possible to use a solution in an environment similar to AWS or Azure Government Cloud? So Dataiku has a couple of different deployment methods. We do have like a Fed team. And I know that there are some, like we can be installed in Azure Government Cloud as like a part of your tenant. Same with AWS. What you're looking at here on the screen is our SaaS offering, which is hosted on AWS. And so the nice thing about the software as a service is all that backend work is controlled by Dataiku. So it's a little easier to implement, get started. You see that time to value really increase because you're not having to manage the software itself. But we also have the ability on a couple of fronts to both pull in and push to different sources. So you can see here under our unified monitoring tab, we can actually pull in and deploy to Azure ML, to SageMaker, to Vertex. We're really integrated with all of those major cloud vendors and have been partnered with them for a number of years. So I think you would be able to, leverage Dataiku within those environments. And then similarly, like you could build out a chatbot in those services. I think Dataiku streamlines it and makes it a little easier, especially for non-coders. Yeah. So additional real world use cases. I'm assuming this is from like a chatbot scenario. I know that there are just like a ton of just in general GenAI use cases that we would have. So I've been talking to, so I work with a couple of like financial institutions, so and insurance companies who are looking at different like contract analysis, wanting to make sure that like, especially in underwriting, there's a lot of different nuance to approvals that are put forth. So being able to actually use an LLM, historically using traditional natural language processing takes a lot of time and baseline knowledge, and the workflows are kind of big and messy and take a lot of time to kind of get that feedback loop. What's cool about using generative AI for use cases like that is it actually simplifies these entire huge workflows into a single process. So the LLMs themselves are really good at working with language. I would not recommend using them something that is more like quantitative or mathematical. So when I think about something like in manufacturing, common use case is predictive maintenance. So can I predict that this machine is going to fail, or can I implement some sort of maintenance model at a certain time frame that before the whole line gets shut down? Those tend to be fairly numerical use cases. It's very quantitative. We're looking at a lot of numbers that are coming in. Traditional ML is going to be your best bet for that. when it comes to things like looking at customer reviews, being able to process large amounts of text data. So things like contracts, again, are a big part of that. Generating emails. So from like a marketing standpoint, you might have like really personalized marketing that you want to be able to pull in based on certain metrics in a data table. And that's like another kind of vertical use case, is being able to generate content. And it's not that you would necessarily send out that content right away, but your content creators aren't necessarily having to start from scratch, and it gives them a baseline to start from. So I think I had a number of different verticals through that, trying to like make it relevant to whoever's on the call. Happy to again chat on LinkedIn about that later. Awesome. Yep. So let me send both our Academy in the chat. So on our Academy website, and I'll open this too on the screen, there are free, let me click on it. There are free certifications. So you are able to go ahead and do quick starts. What's nice about the quick starts, it's 30 minutes, you can get up and running on Dataiku. There are learning paths, which are going to be a little longer. These take, maybe 4 hours or so, but they do prepare you for our certifications. So what's cool, post those on LinkedIn. You've got the ability to say, hey, I'm certified in Dataiku. I know a little bit about ML. And again, those certification exams are here. So this link is in the chat, and I think I haven't signed up for our trial in a long time, but I think in all of these different certifications and learning paths, it'll say start a 14-day trial. So you have 14 days to complete it. If you're interested, you can definitely contact our team for additional information.
I will also share, we can include those links in our follow-up email too. So because you joined the webinar today, you'll have access to our follow-up email indicating what next session is coming up, and we'll include that in the resource list as well. So anyone who missed that and wants to check it out, we'll make sure to throw it in there.
Perfect. And then Luis, so Dataiku, each new version will come out with additional LLMs as a part of that connection tab. So there are ways to go ahead and, kind of take a look. Let's see, I wanted to do it on this one. As a part of those connections, you've got these connections that are listed. Each new version will come out with additional pieces, right? So like, for example, Snowflake's Cortex, Arctic came out recently. So that was also released with our latest version. If you're not seeing what you need as a part of these native connections, we don't want to limit you from using other LLMs. And that's really where the custom LLMs come in. So it's either, you can use something local like Hugging Face if you're pulling in one of those models, or if you have something custom, you can actually connect to those custom models here. Our product team is basically taking a look at industry level. What are the most common LLMs being used? And each version, they're updating those LLM lists to include those as native connectors. Our product team is pretty responsive when it comes to customer needs. So happy to work on those, but definitely easy enough to kind of create that custom LLM. And then I will also just plug Titan ML as a way to use different local models on Dataiku without having to kind of set up those GPUs, which can be really complicated. They're one of our partners as well. So big fangirl of their product as well.
Awesome. Well, we have very quickly run out of time. These sessions go by so quickly. So thank you, Kirsten, for joining us today. That presentation was incredible. I loved the karaoke call out. I think that was super fun. And thank you so much to everyone who was able to join today, as well as all the questions. It's always great to see people interact and have feedback and things that they're looking to solve. So I appreciate your time. Again, we'll send out some links and resources within our follow-up email as well. And then stay tuned for the next episode of this webinar series that will launch in 2 weeks, again at noon Eastern, right here on Zoom. So thanks so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Kelsey.